And I want to thank everybody who's joined us here tonight. This has been such a challenging and difficult year for the city of Seattle and really for everyone across the country. COVID has changed the way we live, the way we interact with one another, how we can operate our businesses. We are in the midst of a civil rights reckoning that is long overdue in our country. And just this weekend, the governor announced new restrictions related to COVID, which I know is increasing so much challenges for small business owners, for their employees, right at the holidays. And so I know it's particularly difficult time for people to join. I'm really sorry that we can't join in person, that COVID has pulled us apart in that way as well, because I think that these meetings are so important to who we are as a city and the fabric of our city. So thank you for turning out for this. I want to give a particular thanks to the residents and businesses of West Seattle, South Park, and Georgetown, who have been so impacted by the outage of this bridge. We've been listening to you since it happened, but your input tonight is going to be very important. Every time we approach this kind of decision, we need as much community input as possible. You're going to hear a little bit tonight about what the experts have told us, what the task force has done, but hearing from you directly truly does make a difference. I've already heard from a number of you. I've been able to get to West Seattle, to Georgetown, to South Park, and I hear a sense of urgency. I know how important this bridge and that infrastructure is to people being able to get to doctor's appointments or to their jobs, to be able to visit family. For South Park, not have as many detours through their neighborhood. And for Georgetown, the same, that people perhaps wouldn't just drive through, but be able to stop and enjoy that all that Georgetown has to offer. I really want to thank everybody who served on the community task force. When we formed it, a lot of people thought maybe it would be just what we task force are, just not a very much of a work situation. This one was a lot of work. And I particularly want to thank former Mayor Greg Nichols and Paulina López for chairing that. They did an outstanding job doing that in pulling the community, and their feedback has been critical throughout this. You'll hear from them. I also have to thank the team at SDOT, Sam Zimbabwe, Heather Marks, our great engineers who really, not only Mr. Donahue and others who found this problem, but who've been working steadily through the COVID crisis, through every kind of weather and smoke event to try to get this issue resolved, because they know how important it is to the people of Seattle in this region. I also want to thank Councilmember Lisa Herbold and Councilmember Alex Peterson for representing the diverse communities and really working to understand what's happening on this bridge so they can help make the good decisions moving forward. In the weeks ahead, we're going to have a very clear direction or path forward to provide the safest, fastest alternative for West Seattle. From the beginning, I've wanted to address the bridge closure with a decision that has the highest degree of certainty and the lowest level of impact to communities in and around the Duwamish Valley, the city, the region, and the state. We've been working very closely with the community to address many of the challenges we've seen during this. And we know it's not enough, though we've tried to improve the mobility by different traffic patterns and lights. We still know how frustrating it is. But we continue to listen to communities on where we need to improve things. We're very sorry the First Avenue South Bridge itself needed to have repairs, just showing how dependent we are on some of our infrastructure. I want to also acknowledge that this closure has disproportionately impacted some of the communities of color in and around the Duwamish Valley. Those communities have already been disproportionately impacted by the COVID virus, both in the health impacts and the economic impacts. So in addressing all of the issues as we went through this, we had a big focus on equity and how we had to make sure that the challenges we were facing, we did it through a race and social justice lens. And we're really thinking how to restore not just mobility, but equitable mobility. And it's critical that we address the impacts. Tonight, we're going to continue the conversation, sharing our latest information with you so you have it, taking your questions. I've got a big team working behind the scenes to make this technology work. And if we can't get to your questions tonight, because I know there'll probably be more questions than we have times, we will get that information from you and try to feed information back to you. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Andres Mantilla, who will introduce our fabulous co-chairs. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you, Mayor Durkan. I think we're going to hear from our co-chairs now here, former Mayor Greg Nichols and Paulina López. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Andres, and thank you, Mayor Durkan, for being with us tonight for this town hall for the entire community and being with us on numerous occasions in the task force to allow us to ask questions and share with you our thoughts after months of work in trying to help you figure this situation out. I could tell a couple of stories about Andres, but unfortunately, there's not enough time for that. But maybe another occasion. Uh, Paulina and I have been co-chairing this task force for about 5 months now. And I noticed one of the questions in the Q&A was whether this process has slowed down or changed the schedule. And I will assure you it has not. There was a lot of information for us to take in, but there's a lot of work that the city needs to do to make sure it's done its due diligence in making a decision that will affect tens and, in fact, hundreds of millions of dollars. So we're going about it carefully and as quickly as we possibly can, and hearing as many voices as we can. We've spent a lot of time learning the technical issues behind this. We're not technicians, we're just folks, former elected officials, business owners, community activists, residents, and people who have a stake in these communities. But we did need to know enough to be able to balance the kinds of questions that the mayor's going to have as she makes a very, very key decision between repairing what is there now and moving toward an immediate replacement. She's heard and she just reflected that time is of the essence. She knows that it's affecting communities very directly, and I know her decision will reflect that. So thank you all for joining us tonight. You have lots of choices. You could be watching the disputed election on CNN or whatever, but you've chosen to participate in this town hall, and I thank you. And I turn it over to my esteemed co-chair and friend, Paulina López.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Mayor Durkan. It has been an honor to be here supporting the city on this important work to reconnect with Seattle and the Duwamish Valley communities. My name is Paulina López, and I am zooming from the Duwamish Valley, and where I would like to acknowledge that we are in the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, and that we honor and gratitude the land itself. I wanted to let you know, Mayor Durkan, that I have appreciated your vision for all the inclusive representation from all the different task force members. Our task force members have been wonderful in 12 different meetings where, as Greg said, we have had to learn very fast and speedy some of the technical pieces, but it has been really enjoyable. And to discover the wisdom from everyone and the advocacy to learn about the West Seattle Bridge background, and also moving forward and to put in the priorities. The priority for our communities obviously is not only the traffic movement, but is also the safety and the health of the people that are being impacted big time. So we are supporting here the city, the task force, continue to the place the well-being and economic security. Thanks for mentioning Georgetown and South Park as the impacted communities that we put front and center to this process as you are prioritizing with equity and mobility lenses there. Again, I just wanted to say thank you for our community task force members who were representing a very diverse area, neighborhoods, industries, government, services across West Seattle, businesses, and nearby communities. We believe that the diverse groups will make a better decision and the recommendations. And I want to make sure that they get acknowledged for all the time and commitment they have put into this committee. Very appreciative for the insights of the elected officials. It is, and I completely agree with. It's a very challenging and complex subject, but we know that you're going to be making the best decision for our communities to make sure that either replace or replacement are going to be reflecting all the values and the community participation with the right decisions. So Thanks again. And to all the fellows that are watching us, I look forward to discussing and to hearing from you what the decision is being made. Andres?
Thank you, Mayor Nichols and Paulina. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Director Sam Zimbabwe of SDOT. Sam.
Thanks, Andres, and thanks to everybody who's joined us. I think we're up to about 300 participants online right now, which shows the level of interest in this topic. And I want to start off by thanking Mayor Durkan, Mayor, for all your leadership on this effort. I don't think at any point in Seattle's history as a mayor had to declare a piece of infrastructure a civil emergency, and we had to do that for this bridge. I also don't know that any other mayor has had to climb down the side of a bridge 140 feet in the air on a long wobbly ladder to see all the things that we're doing currently and see the progress that we've been making. I also want to share, thank our community task force co-chairs, Mayor Nichols and Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition Executive Director Paulina López, for all of their work, and all of the members that were just up there on the screen, including both elected officials and community members. We would not be at the place that we are right now with this project if it wasn't for the ongoing dialogue and the support and the leadership you all have shown, and the time and effort that you put into this. It really means a lot to the whole SDOT team that's been working on this. Before I jump in, and really I'm going to cover a couple things fairly quickly, what we're doing, what the situation is now, what we're doing, and what comes next. I just want to share again that I am a West Seattle resident. I'm coming to you live from West Seattle. We have 2 working parents, 2 kids in school. We recognize the challenges that everybody in this community is facing, and share in the urgency of finding the right solution. I also want to thank all of SDOT who has come together and really pushed with an urgency. Mayor Durkan mentioned Heather Marks, Matt Donahue, just a whole crew across SDOT that has come together to deliver large and small on this project already. We recognize that this emergency has impacted so many people across our community, businesses, residents, and that we should only be in this situation once. So we can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how we got to where we are. And as a reminder, this has not been a maintenance issue. We started looking at the condition of the West Seattle Bridge. We were inspecting it on an annual basis, twice as frequently as required by federal code. Through that process and through a load rating process to understand what stresses were facing the bridge, we discovered these cracks growing at an accelerating rate. We closed the bridge very quickly to traffic back on March 23rd, and have been working day in, day out since that point to get to the place that we are. The challenges that have presented themselves and that we've worked to address were not caused by any lack of maintenance effort, any lack of maintenance attention. You can actually see in this slide where we had already done sealed preventative maintenance, sealed up some older cracks, and seen that effort, those maintenance efforts have been successful in preserving our options as we get in here to figure out where is going to happen next. We can move on here. I will just say again that our efforts have been driven by public safety, and they will continue to be driven by public safety as we move through this program. There's 6 pieces of work that are going on right now that I'm going to talk about briefly, and about what goes next. So I'll talk about the work of stabilizing and shoring the high bridge. We'll talk a little bit about the traffic mitigation to help everybody moving back and forth. Closely monitoring and maintaining the low bridge, and also discussing and shaping the ways that we manage the low bridge capacity to make sure that it remains a vital emergency freight and transit corridor, moving the most number of people and goods to and from West Seattle. Figuring out what our long-term path is on the high-rise bridge and understanding all of the considerations that go into making the right decision here. We've already advanced efforts to secure emergency and long-term funding, and we've throughout this process provided clear communication and transparency, and we'll continue to do that for as long as we need to. I'm going to talk a little bit about the stabilization work that is underway. And while I talk, there's a little video that will play of the visit that Mayor Nichols and Paulina, the mayor, and I took last week to see this up close and personal. Work has been going on the bridge 6 to 7 days a week since March. This is inside of the bridge. There is now new post-tensioning cables that are helping to stabilize the bridge. We've put in new monitoring equipment throughout the bridge that helps us keep track of what's going on a day-to-day basis and monitor conditions remotely. We've also continued to do in-person inspections up close to see how the bridge is responding to all of the activities that we have underway. This work was necessary whether we end up choosing to repair or replace the bridge, and this work was not possible with live load, with traffic on the bridge. We have had to cut a hole into several holes into the deck of the bridge to provide access into the hollow structure beneath. And these work platforms that you can see us standing on here are suspended from the deck of the bridge and require traffic to be off the bridge to enable this work to be done. A little bit more detail, you can go to the next slide, of exactly what's happened. On the left, you can see a sort of cutaway of that center span going across the river and where those new post-tensioning strands. So these are large cables. Each one of these bundles of cables is now holding 280,000 pounds of tension that are anchored through the bottom of the bridge and holding the force together as part of the structure. Those are on both, there's two parallel hollow girders where we're standing in that picture. The same system is in both of those girders now. And then we've done important work to release tension in what is known as Pier 18. So one back to the right, to the east of where on the graphic it's labeled Pier 17. And this was a piece of the infrastructure that was not allowing the bridge to respond as it was designed to. It had become locked up and it was not transferring loads correctly. We've done a lot of work as seen with this specialized saw here, suspended it from a work platform to release that tension. And we've seen positive results from how the bridge is responding. Can move on to the next slide and talk about the efforts we've made to reconnect West Seattle. And the challenges of the bridge that we face are technical, but this is ultimately a human scale problem. We know that each and every one of you listening in tonight are seeing your own individual challenges, your family, your business, what is happening. And we've taken many steps already to make changes. And no matter what path we take, there's a lot of additional work that we need to do. The goal of this effort is to restore similar levels of transportation connectivity across the Duwamish, which is a real challenge. We have lost a piece of infrastructure that carried 100,000 trips a day. We also know that this is an equity issue. The burdens of the detour routes are disproportionately impacting communities of color who already have faced historic patterns of economic and environmental injustice. As we work on the technical side, on the bridge, on the infrastructure, we also need to make changes in the traffic pattern and in the connectivity for all modes across the Duwamish. We've already implemented over 185 traffic improvements since we closed the bridge, 23 of which came directly from our surveys that we did through the Reconnect West Seattle process. And we will continue to make these investments in the community throughout 2021 and as long as we need to continue to do so. Part of that has been an ongoing commitment to engagement with communities along those detour routes. We've done walks, met with businesses, done regular updates in multiple languages, really understanding exactly what impacts there are and making sure that our solutions are based in community values and community understanding. And that's been invaluable, the time and the effort that members of the community have spent with us working on this. In the left there is Councilmember Herbold on a neighborhood walk with us in Highland Park. Next slide. Switching gears a little bit to the low bridge access. And I know this is a place of grave concern to many of you. We get lots of questions about this. I've already seen some in the Q&A coming through. A little bit about the low bridge. It was opened about 30 years ago now, designed to carry about 20,000 cars each day. We quickly put into place restrictions on the low bridge to allow only emergency vehicles, freight, and transit. After seeing how the traffic patterns responded, we made some changes there, and we allowed for all traffic to use the bridge between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. We've relied on SPD, Seattle Police Department, enforcement of the low bridge restrictions, and many of you have likely seen that at certain times there are some scofflaws who take advantage of there not being enforcement. We are moving towards automated enforcement of those restrictions, and that will also enable us to get a much better sense of the full cycle, the full daily use of the bridge with those restrictions. We've also convened a portion of that community task force and some outside stakeholders as part of a stakeholder committee to review and provide recommendations about future policy changes, how we can make sure we have emergency vehicle access, how we can make sure that freight, critical freight can get back and forth from Harbor Island, Terminal 5, back and forth, while also making sure that we utilize the bridge to its greatest extent possible. This is something that will likely continue to be an active discussion, active management approach as we go forward throughout the closure. I'm going to talk briefly about what comes next. And there's a lot of work that's happening and will continue to happen regardless of which pathway we're on. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking just about those two big pathways, repair versus replace. First, we need to finish our stabilization work. We're very close to being done. We will continue to do ongoing monitoring and inspection to see how the bridge performs as we get into the colder parts of the year. And we know that one of the challenges that we face is as we get below freezing, as our temperatures go down below freezing, the bridge and the concrete and steel contract and respond differently. Until we've gone through some of those colder temperatures that we face, we won't know exactly how successful this work has been. Simultaneously advancing our repair and replace, as we've done that all throughout this process until we're at that point where those paths diverge. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then making sure that we're taking all the information that we're getting now and not losing any time and informing the decision-making process. So I'll talk a little bit about the repair pathway on the next slide. So I showed that picture of the new cables that are strung inside of the bridge, holding the central span together, sort of cinching it up like a rubber band. If we're on a repair pathway, we will need to add more of that same material, connecting between the piers, the columns across the bridge, and holding the bridge together from column to column and holding those girders together. This is expected to take through 2021 and then be able to open to traffic at some point in 2022. And we do not yet have a definitive timeline of exactly when that would be. We expect in our work with our technical advisory panel, which has also given tremendous amount of time and input into this process, we think that with this investment, we would be able to solve the problem that has presented itself. We'll still have an older bridge that would have ongoing maintenance and inspection needs, and we don't yet know what that full lifespan of the bridge would be and when we would need to eventually replace. Our estimate for this is on the order of $50 million at a very, very preliminary design level, really at a conceptual level of what additional work will be needed. And as part of our cost benefit analysis that we did earlier this year, we would think that over the next 100 or so or 75 years out to 2100, we would have close to $1 billion in total ownership costs under this scenario. I want to be clear that we have an older structure. We've seen the bridge respond well to what we've done so far, but this solution would have the risk of the potential for another unplanned or future shutdown, and at some point a need to replace the bridge at that point in the future, hopefully in a planned and orderly fashion. We need to advance the design of this additional post-tensioning and be able to know exactly what our scope and schedule and budget would be for this pathway. You can go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to inspect this after. We showed the picture of the mayor and I on that work platform that's now currently suspended below the bridge. That doesn't usually exist. It had to be installed, and we had to close the bridge to traffic to install that. So usually the way that we inspect this bridge is with what's called an under-bridge inspection truck, one of my favorite pieces of SDOT equipment called the U-Bit. You can see it here, not on the West Seattle Bridge, but you can see somebody in that arm of the bucket truck, and we need to do up-close in-person inspection of the bridge, and we would need to do so every 6 months, at least for the next 5 years, which is pretty frequent. To get all the way inside and around the structure, that arm has to extend as far as it possibly can to enable somebody to get all the way around and underneath the bridge. And so this would require some lane closures as we do this work, because this can't be done very easily, and we need to make sure that that's done safely. We also will need to get down inside the bridge. That's usually done through a manhole that also requires some lane closures. And we'll have to make sure that all the equipment that we put in on the bridge is staying strong and continuing to do the work that it's currently doing and would do in addition. I'll provide a quick overview update of the rapid replacement pathway. And I see the questions starting to come in, and so I know that folks really want to get to that point. I will stop here pretty soon. We've talked about the idea of an accelerated replacement, and this is an idea that we've brought our design team on board. This is something that they've had experience with in connecting New York and Vermont with the Lake Champlain Bridge. It's also a concept that has been used in this broader region as well. The Fremont Bridge in Portland was installed in 1973 with a very similar approach, but in a very different context. I want to also make sure people are clear that rapid in this context, we all recognize that this would be a longer closure than we think would be needed with a repair, but we think that this would potentially have that longer lifespan and not need a future closure at some point in the future, and gives us a little bit of that certainty, even if the upfront time is longer. The repair pathway would get traffic open sooner with a little bit less certainty for exactly how long the repairs would last. This 2023 timeline would be contingent on funding and permit approvals and the procurement process to get this structure built in very rapid time. And I think everybody in Seattle knows about some of the challenges we've had in terms of meeting aggressive timelines on some of our infrastructure projects. I think everybody also recognizes the emergency nature that we're in right now, and understands the urgency from all parties. And that goes for everybody in the city, all of our partners at city, state, and federal levels in terms of what this means for the people of Seattle, of the region, of the state, the broader community. You can go to the next slide. And really the way that this rapid replacement approach would be possible because we could do certain activities in conjunction with each other at the same time. Demolition of the existing bridge could happen at the same time that the members of a new bridge would be fabricated offsite and brought on site. It's an innovative idea, but it's been proven elsewhere. And we're doing work right now to understand exactly whether and how it can be adapted to this situation. I'm going to wrap up very soon. I will talk about funding. Before I do that, I just want to reiterate again that we have not lost time at this point because of the dual track nature that we're on. The stabilization work has taken time. It's been critical to supporting and making sure that we can preserve all options on the table. And we continue to finish the work that's going on right now. We don't get to a point at which these diverge until in the first quarter of 2021. And we've continued to do work advancing on multiple fronts. Certainly the timing and the focus and the attention is critical as we get to that point of making sure that we're acting with the greatest urgency to restore this transportation connection. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about funding strategy. The city has already committed up to $150 million as part of in our budget. That comes from the anticipation of long-term bond commitments that we would have to make as a city. We see the need for partnership across all levels of government with Washington State, with the Port of Seattle. We've already received grants through the Puget Sound Regional Council, other stakeholders who recognize the importance of this. We also recognize the need to seek federal funding and financing, potentially both discretionary grants and formula resources, and then figuring out what, if any, additional local contributions we would make. And one of the ways to do that is to look at traffic and revenue study to see if tolling is part of the idea, or determine that it's not a good idea and doesn't merit further consideration. Next to last slide is just all the level of effort that we've done working with the community. We're now over 350 people participating in this tonight. The level of interest and engagement has been substantial, and we've worked to make sure we're providing clear and transparent information. We're circulating weekly updates. If you haven't been getting those, we'll have information at the end about how to make sure you're signed up. Next slide, and last slide. We're continuing work in all 6 areas of the program that I talked about at the beginning. We're going to see how the bridge responds as we finish the stabilization work and we get into this colder weather. We're bringing more information every day about both pathways, and we're learning things each and every day about both the repair and the replacement pathways. We're going to continue the efforts to communicate and provide updates, and then continue our engagement at the community level with tribal partners, with other agency partners, as well as we go forward. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andres to facilitate the question and answer period.
Great, thank you, Sam. We're getting questions here through the chat bar, but let me just quickly go through how to ask questions. To ask a question or submit a comment, you can use the Q&A tool on your menu bar. Enter your question and it will be submitted in the queue. We have about 30 to 40 questions right now. I'll read out the questions for our team to answer. And to try to get through more questions, though, I will try to group similar questions together. Your question will not be visible to the other attendees until it is answered. Again, if you are watching on YouTube, you can submit your questions to westseattlebridge@seattle.gov. It's an email address that we're watching, and then those questions will also be brought into the mix here. And I also want to acknowledge that we did receive some pre-submitted questions ahead of time. I will bring those in. They're similar themes of what folks are asking tonight. So I'll do my best to bring and overlap those similar themes. And again, if you don't get your question answered, please submit it to the email address. So we're going to start actually with some questions, Sam, related to the lower bridge. Can the lower bridge be opened to all on weekends? It's from maybe 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on weekdays as well, or can it be restricted to a certain segment of workers, essential workers, healthcare workers, first responders, et cetera?
Sure. So I mentioned that we have a group both internal to SDOT and some external stakeholders looking at just those questions. And those external stakeholders span across the healthcare industry, the maritime industry, a whole business community. One thing that we've seen is when we opened up access between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., we immediately saw a big spike in the use of the bridge after that 9 p.m. time. And so one of the things that we will continue to try to manage is the amount of, making sure that we maintain freight access, emergency vehicle access, and see where and how we can relax those restrictions. The addition of photo enforcement very soon now will open up those possibilities more substantially and enable us to have a bit more tailored approach, we hope, to providing access.
Great, thank you. And Sam, will that also, the next question is really about the impact on Harbor Island workers. Do you want to speak anything specifically more to that population?
The way that the port works and the way the port workers work is a real challenge, and Harbor Island workers need to have access to get dispatched from one side of the bridge to the other to get to Terminal 5. I think it's been an ongoing discussion about how to best support that work and workforce in accessing those critical destinations.
Thanks. Next question from Pete Spalding. Why is more attention not being paid to the neighborhoods of North Delridge and Delridge? They're dealing with some similar construction projects as well as those to the south. Do you want to speak to any particular plans around Delridge?
Sure. So, I will say I saw that question come through, and it's a great one. We have the construction right now going on of the Rapid Ride H line all along Delridge, and we know that has an impact on communities as well. When we planned that construction before the start of the bridge crisis, we were also we tried to be considerate and divide that work into smaller pieces and try to minimize the impact over time. We're also working to aggressively start rapid ride service and make sure that we can provide improved transit connections there, which will be part of the long-term future of West Seattle in terms of mobility. So that I know that work has had an ongoing impact on communities. We've been making great progress over the course of this year, and we'll look to minimize the duration of that work without adding to the burden that those communities are facing. Certainly as part of the larger Reconnect West Seattle program, there are ideas and ways to help improve connections in the North Delridge part of the community as well.
The next question, Sam, also maybe for you and maybe the mayor. Mayor, some folks asking about when the bridge closure was declared an emergency, and as a result, missing out on some state and federal support in terms of funding. So that's one piece of that. The other piece is, with the change in administration, do you feel that there would be more support for these types of infrastructure projects? Oh, you're muted, Mayor.
So thank you for the question. And I get asked those questions a lot. On the first one is whether the declaration of emergency, we missed out on funding. The answer to that is no. In fact, it unlocked some possibilities for us. And there was no significant federal or state funding that was available at that time. I think Sam mapped out for everybody what might be available. I have been meeting pretty regularly and talking to the heads of our congressional delegation, both Senators Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray, Pramila Jayapal as well. I talked to her this weekend, in fact. I've talked to the governor repeatedly about this project. And last week I was able to participate in a group of mayors, a small group of mayors, talking to the head, the chairman of the House Committee on Transportation and Housing. And so we are actively making sure that when there is federal funding available, that we will be hopefully towards the front of the line for it.
Thanks, Mayor. Some questions as it relates to the sound transit planning, Sam, the future sound transit planning, and how does it overlap with some of the information you just shared? Is the elevated light rail addition with stops at Avalon, the junction, and more still being considered with the bridge failure, or is that postponed due to funding?
So, Sound Transit is in the midst of an environmental process on the whole of the West Seattle to Ballard link extension. That work has continued, and we've been participating with them through that work. The whole of the Sound Transit program, I think, is a little bit uncertain at this point, given the revenue impacts that they've seen from the COVID-19 crisis. They will be engaging with their board in a process of looking at the whole of the capital program. I think starting next, or it's already started, but really in earnest next summer, to determine if there's any large-scale timing impacts to the West Seattle connections. I think our role with them right now on the bridge has been to understand whether there are different opportunities now presented with the bridge being closed and potentially replaced. I would say in a repair scenario, there's not a facility connection possible. Having a shared facility. In a replacement scenario, there are some challenges, but that's where we would need to engage and discuss further with Sound Transit on a technical and timing basis.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Andres. I also serve on the Sound Transit Board, and I'm on this the expansion subcommittee. So we discuss where we are in the process. The full Sound Transit Board will take up this in December, kind of how far we're going to be delayed on all of these projects. I do think, as Sam said, is that, one of the questions I asked at the very outset of this was, is there a way to consolidate whatever we do with Sound Transit's efforts? Because we should be able to do that. Unfortunately, in both a repair and a replace mechanism, this bridge, because Sound Transit has to enter and exit the bridge in a different way than this traffic pattern, regardless of what alignment it is, it makes it very unlikely that we can accommodate. The bridges that exist today, if we repair it, we can't add lanes because of the engineering. And the replacement structure itself would be using the existing supports. And so we can't really add lanes to that, unlike they did on I-90, where they had the ability to add light rail to that bridge because they built it with that in mind. But we will continue to work with Sound Transit regardless, because we've learned, if nothing else, we've learned from this process that we need more mobility between Seattle and West Seattle, and that we need more redundancies as well. The reliance on this bridge and the impacts it's had because of its loss have been very significant, and we want to mitigate against that in the future.
Thanks, Mayor. Next question is around speed limits. Can someone please explain the extreme reduction to the speed limit on West Marginal between West Seattle and Highland Park? And then adding to that, Sam, is SDOT tracking that data, and are there any plans to change those speed limits as the data comes in?
Sure. So, we have been making an effort to reduce posted speed limits around the city as part of our Vision Zero initiative to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries across the city. And what we've found is that when we even take the step of reducing speed limits slightly and increasing the number of speed limit signs that we have, we see crashes go down, and we see those serious injuries and fatalities go down as well. we also know that crashes, in addition to that human cost of life and limb, also have a substantial cost in terms of the time delay in travel. And so in this situation where we have even fewer options, as the mayor just said, if we have a serious crash on one of those main arterials, we could further impact people's ability to get around. And we actually had a very serious collision on West Marginal Way a few weeks ago, and that shut down the whole street for hours for the investigation and for the life-saving efforts and all of that. And so the idea is that if everybody just goes a little bit slower, everybody will get to where they need to go more safely, more reliably over time.
The next question is around project schedule. A lot of questions that we're receiving tonight is around when is the actual decision going to be made, and what is the next 6 months or so of the construction or of the project look like? So Sam, maybe you want to address that.
Sure. So, I will say again that we haven't lost time on any pathway that we've been on over the last since the day the bridge closed. I will also say that as I talked about both pathways, both the repair and the replacement pathways, we have substantial risks before we are back to restoring traffic, and may not even know until we are back to the point of restoring live load on a repaired bridge exactly how the bridge responds. So I think no matter which pathway we are on, we have substantial work to make sure that we address the risks that we see and are prepared for any eventuality and don't lose any time in restoring this critical transportation connection.
Thanks. Next question is around the term that you were using around older bridge. And what were the funds that were in place prior to the emergency declaration in order to keep the bridge, keeping the bridge maintained, knowing that it was older? Was there money moved around? Was it planned on and scheduled for CIP replacement before with the funding plan?
Yeah, I would say that until these challenges began to emerge, and we tracked some cracking of the bridge going back to 2013, but didn't have any anticipation that it would come to the point that it's at, and didn't take any steps to skip any maintenance activities that were recommended at that point. There has not been a capital project in place to replace this bridge or even do major repairs. It's in a lot better condition, or it wasn't in a lot better condition than many of our bridge structures around the city. Our maintenance activities are condition based, and we take both preventative and repair steps based on those conditions of bridges. This was not on the concern list, and this problem emerged very quickly and was identified because of the inspection schedule that we were on, which was an aggressive, more frequent than required inspection schedule. Also, since the bridge has been closed, we've done what's called non-destructive evaluation. We've looked inside the concrete without opening it up, without needing to take the bridge apart any further, to see the strength left in the concrete and the steel that's embedded within the concrete. And have found that the steel is still in good, strong condition, which leaves our pathways open substantially. So the maintenance efforts, the addition of epoxy grouting that we have done has preserved the strength of the steel, and that has left our options open and leaves us the flexibility to figure out exactly what the right pathway is.
And Andres, I'll add to that when they came to me and said that we need to close the bridge, it was really critical that we do these steps, and we did have to tap into SDOT fundings to get to where we are today. And we've used various mechanisms to do that, but we were really fearful that the bridge could fail. And if the bridge failed, not only would it present a huge number of safety issues for everybody in the corridor and for businesses and beneath that, but it would create an entire different mobility issue, as well as really limit our options on what we could do. So the first thing we had to do was stabilize this bridge so it wouldn't fail. And many people have asked, why would you stabilize it if one of the options is demolition? Because we could not afford for this to come down on its own and not have a controlled demolition if that's the direction we're going. There are too many people and businesses in and around that bridge that would be at jeopardy. And once the bridge failed, our ability to repair it would have been greatly diminished.
Thanks, Mayor. Some questions in general around maintenance of the new bridge, Sam. Specifically, how that $916 million figure came to play over the lifetime of the bridge. And is that cost maintenance only, or does that include the eventual replacement?
That's a great question. And, some of those larger numbers come out of our cost benefit analysis, which is something that we worked on as we were taking these stabilization steps to help inform the repair replace decision. The cost benefit analysis tried to take all of the potential factors and provide apples to apples comparison of all the different pathways. And so we considered the upfront capital costs, the ongoing maintenance and operation costs of a structure, the eventual replacement cost. So we know that in the event of a repaired bridge, eventually that bridge would need to be replaced. And then also looked at the point in time that we ended the cost benefit analysis, looking out to the year 2100, which still feels like a very long time from my perspective, how much remaining value would be left in the bridge at the end of that period. So in the repair pathway, we would eventually need to replace the bridge. At the point of 2100, we would expect that there would still be some time left of some value and time left in that bridge, versus a replacement structure that we replaced in the near term would be coming to the end of its useful life around 2100. So that $916 million figure that I cited is, once you factor in all of those different factors as part of that cost benefit analysis and really try to create some apples to apples comparison. And what emerged from that was that the repair and a replacement of the superstructure only, just the parts above the columns of the bridge, which is where we've seen the structural problems, that those were the two most promising alternatives from a cost benefit analysis, and we're roughly comparable. And so it's a question of some of the other inputs and the risks and the where we see the opportunities as well.
And Andres, maybe if I could just add to that also, if people haven't been watching closely, there were another alternatives that were examined, a tunnel and a full replacement. The tunnel was not viable for a number of reasons, both engineering, fiscal, and other things. And the full replacement just took way too long and cost too much, we thought, to really justify that expenditure. So we were able to eliminate those options, working with both the technical experts and our task force. And so really the two options we're looking at still is that rapid replacement, where we just replace that superstructure in the middle, or repair, where we repair things.
Thanks, Mayor. A question about partnership with King County Metro. Is there any plan to up the hours or frequency of bus service? And then on the flip side, for those that can't or don't use the bus, is there any plan for community shuttles or park and rides across the lower bridge?
Yeah, so thankfully, Seattle voters voted to approve Proposition 1. Thank you for continuing to value our transit investments that we've been able to make over the last 6 years. And I think over 80% of voters in Seattle approved Proposition 1, which helps us fund transit service through King County Metro. And this time, as part of that, we identified emerging needs, including West Seattle Bridge mitigations as part of the needs there. And so as we move forward with King County Metro in partnership, that will enable us to figure out ways to add some service, connecting West Seattle and the rest of the city. And then there do exist some limited park and ride opportunities. As you know, transit service right now during the pandemic is also substantially limited. Only 12 people on a normal bus and 18 people on an articulated bus to help limit the spread of the coronavirus. And as we get back to the ability for transit to carry more people and opportunities like van pools and other things that are just really, really challenging right now. Those are all parts of how we think about the Reconnect West Seattle initiative and the parts of the mitigation plan and approach to the crisis that we find ourselves from a transportation perspective.
Thank you. And just adding to that, any plans on specific to the water taxi or increasing frequency there?
Yes, that's another place where we've been in discussions with King County Metro and figuring out ways to make sure that we have service that supports the level of demand that we will see going forward.
I might add on that, Andreas, that at the very outset, working with Dow Constantine, who is also a West Seattle resident, and talking to Metro, we're looking at the water taxis. Everyone knows because of COVID, there's some limitations on how many people can board a water taxi. And anyone who's been on the water taxi in the winter know that there's some weather things, but we are looking at how we can expand that service. And to Sam's point, and to the real question is, we're going to look at every avenue we have to increase mobility between Seattle and between the main part of Seattle and West Seattle, and in and around South Park and Georgetown until we get this bridge opened.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the questions is once we go into construction, how is SDOT or the city going to be prioritizing out of work, mainly construction workers or people of color, to participate in the recovery of the West Seattle Bridge?
It's going to be a priority. Sam and I have had some discussions about that, and we want to make sure that on all these large infrastructure projects that we're doing a better job of hiring women and minority contractors, but particularly Black contractors and Black people contractors. And so we're going to be really aggressive to see how do we get that. We've been talking to the construction trades as well. They have some of the best apprenticeship programs in the region. And so how do we take advantage of their apprenticeship programs to make sure that we have a pipeline to these really good family wage jobs?
Thank you, Mayor. And speaking of jobs, there's some questions around, has the city engaged with any of its major employers to encourage remote work, especially for West Seattle residents that can't commute as easily downtown or to their job in the city?
So very early on and throughout the bridge closure, we've been meeting with major employers and providing information to employers and employees about both commute options and about how to support remote work that also helps us with our transportation challenges. I think we've seen some continued remote work and with the pandemic still going as it is, and the governor's new guidance encouraging still further remote work in the near term. That's been something we've seen a lot of companies take on. I think it may still be part of the mix, even if we still have travel challenges as more and more people need to travel. It's definitely been something that has helped mitigate the closure of the bridge already, and needs to be part of the conversation going forward as well.
Thanks, Sam. This is popping up a few places, so I'll just ask it here so you can clarify. It says, originally it was communicated that the full repair enabling traffic to return to the team or to the bridge was to occur even if a replacement plan was chosen. This does not seem to still be the case. When did this plan change and why? If repair path continues seamlessly, bridge could be open by mid 2021. Similar process just occurred this summer on Roosevelt Bridge in Stewart, Florida. So that question has been popping up in terms of the replacement plan. Can you address that?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So let me see if I can unpack it and answer the pieces of it. I don't think that we've ever said in a replacement scenario that we could restore traffic and do a rapid replacement. A rapid replacement would simultaneously work to demolish the existing bridge and construct a replacement. In a repair scenario, we have also been pretty consistent that our earliest opening time we anticipate to be in 2022. And that's because of the still challenging nature of the structure, needing to see how the bridge actually responds to the stabilization efforts and making sure that we are appropriately designing what those repairs would be. There hasn't been any inconsistency in terms of the timing or the approach that we've talked about. In a repaired scenario, we would still need to eventually plan for a replacement, and I think we would be well served by starting that planning as early as possible to make sure that if and when it needs to be replaced, we have a plan ready to go, so that we don't get to an emergency closure without a plan ready to go. That is on the repair pathway in which we still need to invest a substantial amount of resources and money to add additional support to reopen the bridge to live load traffic.
And maybe I can put that in just a little simpler. I think maybe what people heard was we said we were not going to eliminate any options as we went through this first phase, that we wouldn't see whether repair was possible, and if not, then see whether replacement was possible. We looked at all those scenarios at the same time, but we never believed that we would repair the bridge, then immediately demolish it to replace it. And the best estimates we've had were always in 2022 for repair scenario.
Thanks, Mayor. Going back to the lower bridge for a second, in commercial vehicles, what are the criteria for commercial vehicles to access the lower bridge, and how do commercial vehicles apply for that permit or permission?
So right now it is vehicles that are, I believe it is 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight is the threshold for what is considered to be a freight vehicle. Commercial vehicles that are moving goods or providing services. We have had some limited exemptions to that for, as I mentioned, harbor island workers, and then we've worked with businesses through through business organizations in West Seattle to provide some business passes that can be used. Those are the criteria now, and as we move into a photo enforcement environment, we'll have a little bit more flexibility rather than needing to have a pass-based system. We can provide some different alternative ways to manage the slight additional capacity that we think we have right now on the bridge. So that information should be available on our website. We're also happy to follow up with additional specifics about exactly what's allowed right now.
Thanks, Sam. Going back to a question around Mayor, around federal funds, or for Sam as well, are there any limitations to the types of federal funds or access to federal funds that would require a certain course of action? For example, federal funds are not available unless we replace or unless we repair. Can one of you comment on that?
Yeah, I think we can both comment on that. It is both what's available and the timing of when it's available. For example, we were really hopeful at the beginning of the summer that the second COVID relief package would have a big infrastructure component. And we pushed hard for that with our delegation. They pushed hard. Congress originally indicated they were going to do that and then bogged down. We now believe that Congress will not take up infrastructure bills until mid-time next year. So to get in that kind of large mega project where you're called out or where additional funding's going puts us on a different path than we had hoped. There's a range of other grants, and it is, Sam will tell you, they're having a bridge that's out is easier to get funding for than one that is just needing upgrade. We're unfortunate in some regards because an important bridge in Kentucky just went out, and Mitch McConnell is one of the people who will decide what goes in the Senate package. But there are different buckets for different types of funding at different stages, but we will push for assistance from the federal government regardless. The bigger number, to be honest, the replacement mode is going to be harder to put together just because there's a lot of pent up demand for infrastructure dollars across the country. But we've designed a path to get there. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking to Sam about in the coming days as to what's the realistic nature of that path to get enough money to fund this bridge.
Thank you.
I don't have much to add there. I think there are, I would say that there are different funding streams available for a replacement structure than there might be for repairs as well. And a little bit easier pathway in terms of those funding streams. But as the mayor said, we're talking about an order of magnitude greater amount of need in the upfront costs.
Sam, we have some questions here around the use of ferries as a potential, like a car ferry from Fauntleroy to downtown. Is that being considered? We talked a little bit about commuter shuttles, but are there other things you want to add there?
Not too much to add there. That's been a place where we've really worked with Washington Ferries and really tried to become as creative as possible and sort of what's possible. There is very limited dock space at Coleman Dock and the ferry terminal in downtown, which limits some of the possibilities. There are also some limitations and challenges at the Fauntleroy ferry terminal. It's something that I think we're all open to continued ways. We haven't quite cracked the nut yet of how to utilize ferries and what the best way to do that is. And you know, the ridership on the current Fauntleroy ferry, the Vashon and Southworth ferry to Fauntleroy, a large number of people are not using that to go downtown. They're using it to go south from getting off the ferry. And so, you know, ideas of relocating those to terminate in downtown or connecting from Fauntleroy to downtown are kind of challenging in terms of how they would get implemented, whether they would solve the problems that we think they might.
Yeah, there's also a question as to speed through that channel because some of the environmental limitations in the orcas and the need to reduce wakes. And so some of the travel times we're looking almost as daunting as the travel times in cars right now.
Thanks. The First Avenue Bridge and South Park Bridge are alternatives to being used. If either one of those were to close, it would be severe for all neighborhoods and commuters. And the South Park area is not quite, or that bridge is not quite capable of the traffic that's currently travels across the First Avenue Bridge. So the question here is, are other transportation routes being considered? And what is the plan on maintaining those bridges to keep them open?
Yeah, so the mayor actually mentioned it earlier, but the First Avenue Bridge, which is a WashDOT bridge, state-owned bridge, is also seeing some maintenance challenges and some a bearing on the bridge is in need of repair, and so there will be some southbound closures at some point. We've worked very hard with WashDOT to minimize the impact of those, but it's just a reminder that our infrastructure is fragile and needs continued care and attention. The South Park Bridge also is a much newer structure, and you know, the region came together not too long ago to find the emergency funds to replace that bridge. that is, so in much better, newer condition, but it's also a place where we, it's a county-owned bridge that we operate, need to make sure and stay vigilant that we're doing everything we can on the inspection and maintenance of those bridges as well.
Mayor, a question for you. You spoke about it a little bit in your remarks, but what is the city's plan to address the overall economic impacts to business owners, to homeowners in West Seattle as a result of this, and on top of it, with the governor's latest announcement around COVID regulations?
So really timely question. I met earlier today with our Small Business Advisory Council, and the limitations the governor announced today are just devastating for so many small businesses, and particularly restaurants. And I know that businesses in West Seattle had already had a struggle, because before, a number of people would come to West Seattle to eat, to shop, and now it makes it much more difficult. So we are working with the governor's office to see if we can get additional state funding to support and help the businesses that are most impacted. And the city's looking at other programs to see if we can also enhance both things like rent relief for workers or subsidies for the small businesses. So we hope to have more to announce on that. And obviously for those areas that are more greatly impacted, which West Seattle and South Park and Georgetown have been, we will be looking to see how we can help businesses. We know that this has just been, to have this triple blow to those businesses has been really, really difficult. And the city wants to do all it can. Know that you've got great advocates in both your two citywide city council members, Mosqueda and Lorena Gonzalez, live in West Seattle, and Lisa Herbold, who are very acutely aware of the impacts this has had. So know that all of city government is trying to look for ways to mitigate the impacts on the residents and the businesses.
Thanks. And a follow-up, Sam, for you is, has any economic analysis or cost impact analysis for the region been done based on the scenarios, and where is that available for community members to read?
The cost benefit analysis tried to take some assessment of that into account. I think it's economic analysis, especially now with the impacts of the pandemic, are really, really challenging in terms of exactly where and how we're seeing those impacts. Certainly, we know that the longer an overall closure lasts, the more impacts there would be. But I think, again, some of the certainty is also just one of the challenges, and I hear that and understand the concerns about the uncertainty that we have right now, and sort of knowing when we'll be out of the crisis that we're in from an infrastructure perspective.
Great, thank you. We're gonna have about one or two more questions, and then I'm gonna turn it over to the mayor to offer some closing remarks. Sam, overall, as you continue to engage community, what's next? What does the community engagement plan look like? What is the future of the task force that you've assembled, and how can community members continue to get involved?
Sure. So our able co-chairs who spoke earlier, Mayor Greg Nichols and Paulina López, have been facilitating a task force at a breakneck speed. And I think there were times over the summer where we were meeting weekly with the task force. We've continued to meet on a bi-weekly basis as we've gotten more information on the cost benefit analysis. We're meeting on Thursday, and then I think we're meeting the Wednesday after Thanksgiving to talk about the future of that group, and exactly how that group both sees itself and how we can continue to partner with that group as we move forward, regardless of pathway. I think the task force has been integral very recently in terms of the infrastructure decisions, the repair, replace decisions. Prior to that was also instrumental in helping shape and plan for the mitigation activities that we've had. I think there's going to be a role for that task force, potentially, if they're willing to continue throughout the time when we have the connection closed. and make sure that we're dealing with issues that are arising from community. And again, what all of those members have done in terms of giving their time and energy and attention to this has helped SDOT make more informed choices and recommendations and understand how issues can be addressed. So I think that will continue to be a venue that we value tremendously in terms of the time and effort and attention. And then we'll also continue to provide regular feedback, regular updates and information outside of that task force very broadly, as we've done as well.
Thank you, Sam. Mayor Durkan, I'll turn it over to you for any kind of closing remarks before we go to the next steps.
Thank you, Andres. And I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. I want to thank the two co-chairs and all of the task force for the many, many hours that they put into this and the helpful feedback. I was able to get an entire notebook of comments from all the task force members, which I've read through and have gotten some really great insights from that. Not surprising, in Seattle, it's roughly split 50-50 on whether we should replace or repair. But if you look at the values that people talk about, they're pretty much the same. You know, number one is safety. Everyone wants to make sure that what we get is safe. They want to know how long will it take, how much will it cost, and how long will it last? And so looking at those measures, you know, really have been able to push SDOT a lot. I want to thank Sam and his whole team and Matt Donahue, who's on this call, and the engineers who not just discovered this in the middle of the pandemic, but have been really working around the clock to make sure that we had all the best alternatives under a pretty expedited schedule. So I know how difficult and frustrating this has been for the community. And I know that each part of West Seattle already had its challenges, and, you know, Delridge, you know, rightly called out, there was already a lot of construction and changes there. Some people, when they're way north, like at Admiral or places, have to go way south to get it through. South Park has had so many cars diverted through their neighborhood, which, you know, is ironic for them because for so long they were without a bridge and they suffered because of that. And now they're suffering because the rest of the area is without a bridge. And so these are very, very challenging times. I really want you to know that I'm listening. And I would particularly any feedback people have on tipping points on time when I push people on replacement versus repair, the ability to actually get the bridge in place matters to people, and that timeliness. And we know that the high bridge being closed has been just an extraordinarily hardship, and not having more capacity. I also know that besides these alternatives on replace and repair, Sam and his team were looking for what other options we could have to restore additional or temporary mobility as we worked on the longer term solutions. It's really challenging because the Duwamish is a working river, and bridges have to be of a certain height. There's only so many places in the river that you could actually enter or leave a bridge. And so the ability to even put a temporary structure in for some lesser cost while we did a long-term thing turned out not to be feasible. But they've really looked at a lot of innovative designs. And I want to applaud them and applaud all the people who participate in the task force, asking the hard questions, and everybody thinking not just about today, but what was really impressive is what do we need for the future of Seattle and for West Seattle? I know that, again, the goals are going to be through all this hard work is we want to tap into what the community believes, what the experts believe, to make sure that this option is going to serve the people of not just Seattle, but this region as safely and as long-term as possible, but also restoring just essential mobility. As difficult as this has been during COVID, I think none of us could really imagine if we had this outage before COVID, when we were at the height of needing the 100,000 trips per week. And so in some ways it was a blessing that it happened now, but I also realized it just incredibly added to the impacts as well as the additional restrictions that we've had through COVID announced just this weekend. So for the next steps, really we have been every single day. Sam and I talk regularly. I get briefed at least once a week, usually more than that, on the state of the engineering. Where are they on the options? What changes can we look at? What innovations? I've tried to stay in close contact with the co-chairs and hear back from what they're hearing from the task force. I get reports from the technical advisors group. And I think that, you know, we are all in this together. And as much as it feels like that West Seattle is now an accidental island, as the Junction reminded me when they sent the t-shirt, we know we've got to stop that, but we also know that this is really important for the health and vitality of all of Seattle and all of the region. It's one of the most essential corridors we have. And that's my message to the governor and to the congressional delegation when I talk to them. This is impacting the communities of Seattle the most right now, but it's not a Seattle problem. It is a regional problem and a problem that affects thousands of jobs in our region. And so we want to make this decision quickly and to move forward, but we wanted to take the time to make sure that we got enough input from you, from the experts, and that we were considering the very different approaches that we could have. So I want to thank you for this time. We didn't get to everybody's questions, so please make sure you send those and any additional thoughts that people have. We really are looking at it because we want to make sure that at the end of the day, people don't just feel heard, but we've actually gotten some extremely beneficial feedback. So thank you for your time tonight. Again, thank you to Andres, to you and your team for organizing this. I want to thank Shafali, the deputy mayor, who's been in charge of this since day one. And I also just want to, again, thank the whole SDOT team who've been working through really difficult circumstances. But at the end of the day, the true thanks go to the people who joined us tonight, but to the residents and businesses who've been suffering through this, but continue to give us positive feedback and inputs because they want the right decision too. So thank you very much. Thanks,
Mayor. And just some closing logistical remarks for those whose question was not answered. If you do email your question in, it will be answered. And this presentation is being recorded, as I mentioned at the top. And after the town hall, after this presentation, those questions and answers will be posted and uploaded on SDOT's YouTube page, on the West Seattle Bridge project page, and will also be sent out via the SDOT blog. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time, and have a good evening. Everybody wash your hands, wear your mask. Have a good Thanksgiving.